Well, hey, everybody. A detective testified that accused killer Richard Allen has confessed more than 60 times to murdering Abigail Williams and Liberty German in Delphi, Indiana. All of that since he's been in custody. Now, defense lawyers say that these are the ramblings of a crazed man who's been wrongly accused and is now being mistreated in the criminal justice system. But now, the courts are moving him to a new jail. Well, hey, everybody, welcome to Profiling Evil, and I hope that you'll take a moment to hit that like and subscribe button down here at the bottom. As we get started on this update, I also hope you'll consider sharing us with your friends. My comments today are going to be around the murders of Abby and Libby in Delphi, Indiana, and Richard Allen and his defense team, who were back in court this week arguing against much of the evidence that appears to be closer to making its way into being authorized for trial. Now, the biggest concern for the defense, and this is in my opinion, folks, is those jailhouse confessions that Richard Allen reportedly had made. In addition to that, though, they've got to be concerned about that bullet recovered at the scene and the weapon that was recovered in the search warrant. Forensics tie them together, and that's a real problem for Richard Allen. Now, some of you might argue that the forensics aren't possible in this thing. We're going to wait and see what comes out in the court. But all of this happened when they seized a weapon in his home during his arrest that matched a bullet recovered next to one of the bodies. Richard Allen's attorneys took their best shot at dismissing some of the most troubling evidence that they're facing right now. And we're just going to wait for, a little longer for the judge to rule on their arguments. Now, the hearings were anchored by the testimony of a psychologist who reportedly had interviewed Richard Allen and who said that Richard Allen told her in May of 2023 that he wanted to confess to the killings of Abby and Libby near the Mononhigh Bridge after, and this all happened after he found God while incarcerated. Now, the psychologist also said that Allen shared with her what he did on the day of those murders. If you remember, that was back in February 13th, 2017, 7 years ago. Now, he also said that he told his wife about the murders, and he told the therapist this. This was all coming from a defense witness who believes that Allen was under incredible emotional pressure, though, from not only other inmates, but from being locked up in jail. She says the other inmates were verbally attacking Allen, and that there was conspiracy of all angles involved in this thing, including guards, other killers, and of course, odious in the community.
Will a jury be able to hear about the alleged confessions from Richard Allen? That is the focus of a hearing today here at the Carroll County Courthouse. The state says prison guards and inmates at the Westville Correctional Facility heard Allen confess to the killings of Abby Williams and Libby German, and that the defendant also confessed during recorded phone calls with his wife. In court testimony today, the former warden at the Westville Correctional Facility said that Richard Allen confessed directly to him that he committed the murders while the warden was checking on him as he was walking around Allen's cell block. An investigator at the prison said today during testimony that her staff logged 2 other confessions from Richard Allen. But a prison psychologist who met regularly with Allen testified that Richard Allen's mental health was extremely poor, critical, and deteriorating, and that he suffered from stress-induced psychosis around the time that Allen made his confessions. She said there was no doubt he had serious mental illness around that time. So, the defense team says Allen's confessions were coerced. They are asking the judge to suppress the statements, meaning a jury would not hear them during his murder trial. The judge has not yet decided whether to admit the confessions or not, but that decision will be incredibly important for both sides. Richard Allen listened closely during all of today's testimony, at one point turning around and telling his wife and mother, "I love you guys." He'll be back in court again tomorrow for one more day of hearings. This time, it is the prosecutor asking the judge for the ability to keep information out of the jury's hands. Specifically, They want to suppress any statements by the defense team that points to an alternate theory that someone else committed the murders.
Hey, I want to just pause for a quick second to remind you to check out Profiling Evil story maps. You can find them at profilingevil.com on the web. These maps are cool. They're designed to tell you a little bit about a criminal case and provide you with some of the geography around the crime, a place where you can explore maps and explore the case. I want to thank our friends at Esri who've made it possible to use their GIS software here at Profiling Evil. And before I stop, if you would, consider donating to Profiling Evil. You can easily follow this QR code on the screen or one of the links that are down below to make a one-time donation to help us out in some way, if you're interested. And you know what? You can even use the donate button to simply buy me a Diet Dr. Pepper as a little thank you for the extra work we do. But let's get back to this. So the state had Indiana State Police Detective Brian Harshman testify about his investigative efforts into Richard Allen's phone calls. This detective reviewed more than 670 jailhouse phone records. These are calls that Richard Allen has been making while he's been sitting in jail during his incarceration. Now remember that correctional facilities have signs near the inmate phone that say something to the effect of inmate telephone conversations may be subject to monitoring and recording. Let me clarify this because this is where the rocket science comes in. Inmates are informed prior to and during every phone call they make by signs that are posted on the wall or by recorded messages that come on prior to the phone call that tell them and remind them that the phone call is being recorded. Well, Detective Harshman testified that he reviewed more than 150 hours of Richard Allen's jailhouse conversations. Could you imagine listening to 150 hours of somebody yapping? Anyway, 150 hours of his conversations, and in those conversations, he testified that Allen confessed to murdering the girls on at least 60 occasions. Now, he also said these confessions have been made to the wife and the mother of Richard Allen. And according to media accounts, there are some indications that they basically didn't believe him and they challenged his mental capacity. But in many cases, they quickly changed the subject when he confessed. And I think it's probably because they knew that their phone calls were being recorded. Well, as this detective continued to testify, he also added that Allen provided details of the crime, including his motivation for the murders. Those 60-plus confessions happened over a 4-month period of time. And coincidentally, this was a time when he was receiving some mental health treatment for crises like depression and anxiety and disorganized thinking. But over 4 months, he continued to confess to murdering the girls. You know, I did a little research, and murderers who discover religion in jail and subsequently experience depression and anxiety, disorganized thinking, they might be undergoing some complex psychological and emotional processes that are kind of interesting. So I thought I'd just explore a couple of those reasons why someone might be depressed after they find God. Number one, guilt and remorse. Embracing religion often brings a heightened sense of morality and awareness of past wrongdoings. For a murderer, this could lead to intense feelings of guilt and remorse over their actions. And this in and of itself could manifest as depression and anxiety. So the fact that they're depressed doesn't mean they didn't do it. But I don't know if he did. Number two, identity crisis. When people adopt a new religion, sometimes they clash with their previous perceptions and self-identity. And this crisis can create confusion and disorganized thinking as they struggle with who they were in their past and who they want to be in their new beliefs. Number three, stress of conversion. You know, religious conversion, especially in a prison environment, can be really stressful on people. The process of adopting new beliefs and practices can be mentally and emotionally taxing, contributing to anxiety, disorganized thoughts, depression, all of the things that we're hearing he's experiencing. Number 4, social dynamics in prison. Because think about these. Prisons and jails are harsh. They're isolating. Finding religion may not always be as socially accepted as one might think, and could lead to stress, fear of judgment, ostracization, anything that might further separate them from the community there. And this can exacerbate mental health issues. Number 5, psychological vulnerability. You know, many inmates already have pre-existing mental health conditions, and they're vulnerable to psychological distress. The added burden of grappling with these kind of existential questions, seeking redemption and other things, can really amplify the feelings that they have. Number 6, existential reflection. Kind of an interesting terminology there. Religion often prompts individuals to reflect deeply on their life, on what death might be like, and if they believe in a hereafter, what the consequences of their action might be. And this intense reflection can be overwhelming and lead to depressive and anxious states in their mindsets. Number 7, fear of divine judgment. Again, if they believe in a hereafter, a higher power and divine judgment for the crimes they've committed could create an incredible amount of stress, anxiety, disorganized thought. Now, finally, I want to just say with number 8, isolation and lack of support. Because in prison, prisoners turn to religion, but they still feel pretty darn isolated. They lack not only a religious community, but they often lack other communities. This isolation can really exacerbate feelings of depression that can contribute to disorganized thinking. But with all of that, keep in mind, he still made 60 confessions over 4 months. His experience is probably pretty unique, and the interplay of all these factors could probably vary wildly. And I want to make sure you remember, I'm not a psychologist, you know that. But I hope you found this exercise and review to be a little helpful. The opinions are my own in regard to mental health and psychological experiences. But these are things that I've learned through my own academic training, going through college, and through my own personal study. And I thought it was important to talk about it for a moment. Now, back to the detective. The detective's testimony of Richard Allen's repetitive confessions didn't just end there. When Allen was transferred from that prison to the Indiana Department of Corrections Wabash Correctional Facility, and these are really jails to jails, a correctional officer there overheard Richard Allen apologizing for killing Abby. Detective Harshman testified this week that one of Allen's telephone confessions centered on Allen's concern that the crime scene photographs would be just too traumatic for his family to watch, and he wanted to just get through the court process without having to go through all this and having it exposed. Now, in fairness, during the cross-examination, the detective admitted that Richard Allen would occasionally pronounce that he was innocent. So we got to keep that in mind. It's going to be really interesting to see what additional details come out about this case from the hearing itself and from what reportedly was a testimony filled with graphic accounts of the crime scene. I caught one particular moment that was really pretty amazing to me, a gripping moment when former state police investigator Kevin Murphy was testifying. At one point, he was handed a picture of one of the victims, and this 30-year police veteran closed his eyes and began crying. These cases really impact everybody involved. Now, I think there's some really big red herrings that the state has got to get through in order to resolve this case and get a conviction. The state's going to have to answer questions about whether other people were involved, and some of those that specifically have been called out in social media accounts and other things where there's intimate information that's got to be explained. Personally, I think 60 plus confessions that Richard Allen has given, that bullet compared to the weapon seized in his home, and the admissions that he made that he was on the Monon High Trail that day are going to be really difficult to overcome. But this idea that the apparent intimate knowledge that some people had about the case, including sharing it on social media, are incredibly troubling, and they got to be vetted out. It's got to be resolved. We got to have answers to that. Now, the hearing also included some pretty gut-wrenching testimony from one witness after another who described Abby and Libby's injuries, details about the crime scene. I feel bad for the families having to put up with and listen to this. Now, with Richard Allen getting transferred to a new jail, the judge has got to focus on whether or not she's going to allow certain pieces of evidence to be entered into the trial. A trial that's set to begin in about 2.5 months. So with that, we're all left wondering if the state's going to prevail in preventing the defense from discussing other possible perpetrators in this murder case. They want the jury only to consider whether Richard Allen killed Libby German and Abigail Williams. And then, of course, there's the 60-plus confessions that Richard Allen made while incarcerated. I don't think anyone's disputing that he made the confessions. Now, the other thing is the forensics on the weapon and a few other key pieces of evidence. It's going to be interesting to see if the judge will allow the evidence to be introduced into the trial. And all the while, the defense will continue to complain about the timeliness of the prosecution's release of evidence and their petition that the court completely throw out everything against Richard Allen and start over. I just don't think that's going to happen. And I'd really like to know what your thoughts are on this video, folks. Do you think the prosecution has gone too far, or is the defense grasping at straws? I hope that you'll put your comments down below, and I hope you'll take time to respond to each other. And please, take a moment and hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure you're ringing the bell, and make sure you're participating here at Profiling Evil. And please, take a moment and look at our missing persons and unsolved murders map. You can find it at profilingevil.com. When you go there, you might see that there are cases from your community that aren't showing up on there. Please consider submitting them. It's really easy to do, and the link is right there on the map. This is the first crowdsourced missing persons and unsolved homicides map that I know of. And while you're there visiting, make sure you check out Profiling Evil's digital newsletter, The Bolo. In order to get it, you got to sign up. So please sign up for The Bolo, and I promise I'll never share your email address with anybody else. You can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And please make sure you're subscribing to Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. Hey, thanks so much for your support of Profiling Evil, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.